Hello and welcome to this episode of Tripology. I'm Alan and I'm here with the ever solipsistic Adam.
Alan, I won't lie, mate, you're going to have to explain that one to me.
The philosophical principle of solipsism, the idea that nothing exists outside of your own mind, and I've chosen that word for you today because you're over there in your own room, in your own mind, thinking about the future by your lonesome, but I'm here with a man who doesn't have any adjectives as of yet, because I've not prescribed them to him, but we could use handsome, attractive, Irish, beautiful. He's been my travel companion for the last nearly a month now. I'm sat here in a dorm room speaking to you, Adam, across the airwaves with Johnny.
Good afternoon all, how are you doing?
Fantastic, Johnny. Cheers for coming on, mate. I've heard little bits about you, but I'm really looking forward to meeting you.
Listen to that voice and tell me it's not one of the most charismatic things that's ever entered your ear hole. Me and Johnny have been travelling together for a little while. We did a little bit of India together. Now we've done all of Sri Lanka together, and we're here to tell you, Adam, and the listening audience all about that journey.
Wicked. How long have you two been together in total now? It's good few...
In a relationship, we've been together for, it's early days.
Still in that honeymoon period, I would say. I think it's 3.5 weeks in total together.
Since we started counting properly.
Yeah, there's a bit of a mishap at the beginning, but 3.5 weeks, I'd say.
Oh, is the mishap something we discuss on the podcast, or...?
Oh yeah, we can discuss everything. There's nothing we hide from the listening audience. So me and Johnny met at a bus stop on account of the fact that I didn't have any bug spray.
Yes, I noticed the man frantically coming inside, outside, trying to avoid the mosquitoes, and I had some bug spray and kindly offered it to him, and the rest has kind of been history. It turned out we were going to the same location, separate buses. Bangalore was where we were heading. But since then we've kind of been inseparable, I would say.
Yeah, man. I was getting peppered with mosquitoes. It was real intense. Johnny was on a slightly more expensive, better bus than me. So we met, he doused me in DEET, then he went off on his nice bus, I went off on my bus. I quickly got mugged in Bangalore. The audience have heard that story. And then we reconvened in a hostel in Bangalore. We were hanging out on account of we were the only real travellers in that hostel. We went to a wild party together, a sort of bacchanalian affair. We met a guy who self-professed that he ran Bangalore. He invited us to a villa. We were dunking in swimming pools. We were dancing around, boogieing with a load of Russian models. It was pretty crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was one of those nights that just appeared out of nowhere. It was a quiet one, me and Alan just having a couple of beers, and we decided to go to a rooftop bar, and by chance it was the place to be in Bangalore on Saturday night, and things just escalated. And I think, like any night, those spontaneous ones are always the most memorable. So that was a pretty special... That was probably our second day together, I think.
Yeah, second day, and it kicked off a wonderful career in travel together. We've been a terrible twosome going around Sri Lanka now.
So now that you're travelling together, when it comes to the decision making, are you sort of roughly on the same trip anyway? You're having sort of like meetings about where you want to go next or how long you're going to be there for?
I'll let Alan answer that one.
Yeah, the reason we're laughing is because I self-professed, just told Johnny on like day 4 of us hanging out, he had a very stringent plan of what he wanted to do in Sri Lanka. He had a whole itinerary in mind.
Yeah.
And I basically saw this as an opportunity to take a month off planning or deciding anything. So I was like, Johnny, mate, I'm going to level with you. Is it cool if I literally just crowbar myself into all of your plans? I don't want to decide what I'm doing when. I don't want to decide how to do it. Whatever you want to do, I'm in for it. Let's go Sri Lanka together. And Johnny very graciously agreed.
Yeah, now we're coming to the end of our time together in Sri Lanka, and potentially for a while, maybe it wasn't quite the right decision, but I think overall it was a strong one. He's been a constant, loyal travel companion, I would say, and I'm one of those people who's quite detailed in terms of their planning, so I didn't really mind having an additional person come on.
Why don't you think it was the right decision? Or was that just fiction?
Just a little bit of sarcasm, yeah.
Oh, yeah, just comic effect.
Yeah, comic effect.
Oh, my feelings, listeners. But it's been dead good because, look, I've been travelling a long time. Yeah, man. I think it's something I'm quite good at, dude. But it gets exhausting constantly planning. So having someone who had a really stringent idea, who was on the same wavelength as me in terms of like, Johnny's a long-term traveller, he's working whilst he's travelling, he's doing all this stuff. So it was nice to have someone who was clearly philosophically approaching travel in the same way, but he'd already got an idea of what he wanted to do. It just took a lot of the pressure off me. I was glad to have that little bit of a break.
That's wicked. Is Sri Lanka somewhere you've been before then, Johnny?
No, first time. My best friend had been recently, so I just picked his brain, did some research on blog posts, and then kind of just, off other travellers who'd been here that you meet along the way, just put a plan together. And I think we've actually ticked off everything. And I don't think we've deviated from the original plan once.
Yeah. No, we haven't. The plan was good, although one glaring hole in the plan, in my mind, was basically Adam. Like I said, I was just willing to go along with anything, and Johnny pitched me on this idea. He said, "Oh, there's ever such a beautiful peak in Sri Lanka called Adam's Peak. It's this summit where all the Christians say and the Muslims say that's where Adam, God's first human creation, lay his footprint on the earth. The Sri Lankan Buddhists say that's where Siddhartha Gautama nestled his tootsies into the ground. And it's a pilgrimage that all Sri Lankan people, Buddhists, have to go in order to see this footprint." And Johnny pitched me on it. He was like, "Honestly, mate, sunrise, we'll see the footprint, it's going to be amazing." I got excited about it. So elevated were our expectations and hopes that we procured another traveller, an Irish girl called Orla. She came with us, and the three of us, like wonderful musketeers of travel, set off at the early time of 1 a.m. to climb this peak.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I completely base this off one person's opinion during COVID in the off season, whereas I think we went busy season on a Saturday during a national holiday. So I'd say those three criteria, which obviously I knew it was going to be a weekend, wasn't aware it was a national holiday, and this national holiday happened to be a very religious one, so a lot of people undertook a pilgrimage this weekend.
I mean, how many people do you think there was on that mountain? It was absolutely insane, wasn't it?
20,000 maybe, I don't know. And it's not that the actual route is 7 kilometers from bottom to top, so it's not like it's a massive, long path that there's going to be people stringing along with only ones and twos. It was, and we can get into it, chock-a-block, shall we say, or even a standstill at times, which was kind of difficult up 2 a.m. in the morning in the pouring rain.
Crazy.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think the only time I've maybe felt something similar is when you're exiting a football stadium and you've got tens of thousands of people trying to cram themselves through turnstiles and down roads to get different trains. So it really tainted your experience of the whole thing, I assume, and you wouldn't recommend going.
It's almost exactly like that, Adam. It's like leaving a football stadium. If the journey out of the football stadium was entirely uphill, football fans are replaced with religious pilgrims, and the elation of having won a football game is replaced with a sort of somber desire to see the potential of a footprint at the top of a mountain. It started raining incredibly heavily. We were all absolutely soaked through. Orla, bless her, was setting pace, powering on up the mountain. We left at 1 a.m, as I mentioned before. We ended up in a queue to see this footprint for maybe an hour and a half, soaked through. But had we left even an hour later, by the time we walked down the mountain, people were queuing for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours to see this footprint.
Wow. And then what was your frame of mind going into that? Did you kind of laugh it off and take it on the chin, or were people frustrated by it?
So we actually almost turned around. We got probably what we thought was to the top. In hindsight, it was probably only 2/3 of the way, because it was foggy and there was just these little street lights that you could see dotting its way up the mountain.
Constantly tempting you. They were like, perhaps this is the end, this ominous blue blinking light. We were like, that has to be it. It was just like above a shop. It's just blinking.
Well, that's the other thing. This entire way up the mountain is just lined on either side by market stalls, the entire way, which is just crazy. You could get a full cooked meal, sit down, people were napping. Obviously, I'd say it was quite strenuous, would you agree? Like, it wasn't easy in the slightest.
Yeah, and because you have to do it at one point in your life, there was people doing it way beyond their natural skill level. There was like 80-year-old women who were taking all night and all day to do it. And then there was people getting out of the way by carrying their 2-year-old sons up to the top of the mountain, just like, I'll get him in this footprint now because he ain't going to want to do it when he's older. So, I mean, I wish someone had done that for me, frankly, when I was a kid, because it was hell doing it at the ripe old age of 29.
Wow. Is it quite a touristy thing to do then, or just something that lots of backpackers will do regardless of religion?
I wouldn't say it was very touristy. I would say a minority of backpackers in Sri Lanka do this, and the ones that do are doing it mainly to see the sunrise at the top of the peak, right? But let's talk about what was there at the top of the peak. You've got to remember, 2-hour hike at 1 a.m. We'd been up, we hadn't slept. We'd been having a couple of drinks. And so we were kind of marching up there, ready to see this sight. I'd say the three of us, I was the most hopeful and expectant from a spiritual perspective. We know on this podcast I'm partial to a little Buddhist bit of sightseeing, We get there. It might have been one of the worst things I've ever queued for, regardless of anything else.
I would love to know what was worse, because in my mind, it is the clear number one in my entire life.
It was awful, wasn't it?
A complete waste of my time.
I mean, we're queuing for an hour and a half once we got to the top of the mountain. You're sort of shuffling through into this little temple, shoes off.
Shoes off, wet socks still on, walking on wet concrete.
Yeah. Absolutely crazy. And we get there. What did you see, Johnny, when you finally get up to the altar?
Well, you only have about 5 seconds of time in front of this gap in this facade. You see covered... Well, you don't even know what's really there, right? It's a gold-lined temple offering area, I would say, similar to a lot of temples.
A bedsheet across an indent in earth that you can only assume is the vague outline of a footprint, but it's like 1.8 meters long, so it definitely didn't belong to any real person,
Oh my goodness!
Unless Siddhartha part-timed as Sasquatch, it was like impossible.
That's so strange. What a shame. So it was really anticlimactic, and then on the way down, you just head in your hands,
the thing
thinking...
was, the main reason I wanted to climb is because I love climbing mountains, I love summiting, and I love, watching sunrise and sunsets. That was the main reason why I wanted to do it, besides the spiritual side of things.
Yeah.
And we actually decided, because it was so busy and horribly, congested at the top, we decided not even to stay up for sunrise. We left at about 5 a.m, about 1 hour before sunrise, because we were just that miserable.
We effed right down back the mountain. It was nuts. We were, honestly... My face coming out of that temple. Johnny, I was depressed.
Face like thunder.
Yeah. I was already depressed before we entered, because, that was just an afterthought, the footprint for me personally. So I had more time to reconcile with this issue that we had. Alan still had his hopes up. He thought this beautiful gold temple will have this incredible sight.
Yeah.
And you had about 3 seconds. It took probably 2.9 seconds to even understand what you were looking at.
Yeah.
And then you get shuffled out the other side of the temple.
Because there's a lot of stuff, right? Like, you look at this bedsheet over the footprint, and there's like gold adornments and a mala and like a mandala and all these things. So you've got about 2 seconds to process it all, and then you shove it out by there was like security guards in moth-ridden garb, because there was a lot of moths up at the top of the mountain for some reason. They were covered. Each security guard had about 10, 15, 30 moths all about his person. That was probably a more interesting sight.
Yeah, Mothman was the highlight, I'll be honest. They weren't attached to us. For whatever reason, this gentleman's, I don't even know how you describe that coat, long overcoat was just riddled with them, and we self-proclaimed Mothman.
Mothman, riddled with moths.
Yeah.
He was the most interesting thing about the top of that mountain. So here on Tripology, we almost never give 5-star reviews. 1 star for Adam Peak.
Oh my goodness, 1 star. And I'm trying to visualise the way up. The way up, was there opportunity to overtake people, or was the volume of people just so high that it was just crowds going up at a really slow pace?
Initially, Adam, but there's a hell of a bottleneck, Mm-hmm. So you can overtake at the start, but ultimately the long line of elderly people trying to get to the top of the mountain is insurmountable to a point.
Yeah, and then you're kind of at the whims of everyone else's pace. And then at the very top, it was just standstill. We stood for maybe 45 minutes without moving.
Yeah.
And then gradually, just step by step, every couple of minutes, you'd move forward a foot until eventually you got to this Mecca, shall we say.
I mean, yeah. Adam, we were angry about it at the time. This is a couple of weeks ago now that we've now got the opportunity to tell this story. But what we did was, just after we came down the mountain, Johnny, Orla and I sat in what can only be described as a hot tub in a room here in Sri Lanka, and we told the story of Adam's Peak while the feelings were still visceral. That is available on our Patreon. As this episode goes live, you go to patreon.com/tripologypodcast if you want to hear Orla, Johnny and I spout lyrical about how much we thought this hike was just an uncomfortable cacophony of chaos. It's difficult to calm down from, Adam, but we will. We're going to go on a brief meditation break. See you in a sec. And just like three weary travellers coming down from Adam's Peak, our conscious minds return down into our brains after that beautiful meditation break. Adam, Jonny here, he's been a wonderful travel companion, and as such, we decided, wouldn't it be wonderful if the three of us, Jonny, Orla and I, and then for a brief time just me and Jonny, rented a Tuk Tuk to explore Sri Lanka. The reason we did that was because motorbikes, they're okay, scooters, they're alright, taxis are fine, but the real traditional way to explore this wonderful egg-shaped island is via the mechanism of transport known as the Tuk Tuk. It was a hell of an experience. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. I don't know how long you'd been planning this. Was it something that you knew of before you got there? Because I've always wanted to drive one, but I've heard some stories from people we've had on the podcast before that they're not always the easiest in terms of the mechanics.
When was the genesis of our desire for a Tuk Tuk? I'm not quite sure.
I think it wasn't that long-term planning. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 days before. I think probably maybe after Adam's Peak, we realised we needed a pick-me-up, potentially.
Yeah, someone suggested a Tuk Tuk, and it was one of those ideas that once thrown out there, all of our minds sort of latched onto it as being a chance for salvation, both spiritual and travel-wise. We were desperate for that Tuk Tuk. At one point, me and Orla were hatching a plan to get some pipes, and we were all going to go around in a Tuk Tuk with pipes and flat caps on, like posh gentlemen. That never transpired. But we did get the Tuk Tuk, a bright red affair. We dubbed it Raphael, a la the Mutant Ninja Turtle with the red bits on him. We loved that thing, didn't we? It was a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, definitely quite a lot of hatred on my part for various reasons that we'll get into. But I think overall, a great experience. Just happy we only had it for 5 days out of our 4 weeks in Sri Lanka.
Now, there's a recurring joke that happens on Tripology, Jonny, about my driving ability. Adam's witnessed me wrap a little farm vehicle around a fence. There's been all sorts of sort of tragic accidents. I've had a few motorcycle crashes in my time. I don't have an international driver's license, so Jonny was tasked with not just the vast majority of the driving of the Tuk Tuk, but all of the driving of the Tuk Tuk. I got him the Tuk Tuk just a couple of times, and you can see those exact times on our Instagram, instagram.com/tripologypodcast, because I just got in for the purposes of content. No actual driving was done by yours truly.
Not on a public road.
Yeah.
Private roads, don't worry.
Private roads only, yeah.
Yeah.
So, Jonny, you can explain a little bit about the actual driving process.
Yeah, so I had never driven a Tuk Tuk before. Adam, you're completely right. They are, I wouldn't say intuitive in the slightest. They are a fully manual motor vehicle that has a lot of odd quirks, shall we say, in terms of the clutch and how the gears work and whatever else. And if you wanted to, I'm sure you could Google it. But it made it very difficult to drive, especially initially. And as you can probably imagine, the roads in Sri Lanka are pretty chaotic. There are people overtaking at all times, there's buses flying around corners on the wrong side of the road, and it just means that if you're at all a little bit nervous, it's a pretty hard experience at times. I think overall, I got the hang of it pretty quickly, and didn't really have any scares at any time.
I think you did amazing, yeah, because it seems quite flippable, the Tuk Tuk, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it really does. You can feel it actually kind of, when you're turning around a corner slightly too fast, you actually have to kind of straighten it, brake, and then continue steering, because you can feel I'm sure it's not close to tipping, but I imagine it wouldn't take much to flip one of them. But we did not, fortunately.
Wow. Yeah, just on that note, do you feel like you have maybe a level of protection that you don't have from a motorbike or a scooter because you've got the roof over you?
Yeah, you would definitely feel safer. And I think it was even the fact, you're kind of enclosed like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle in a lot of ways, actually.
Full circle.
Yeah,
a bit
full
like
circle.
the eponymous Raphael. We felt turtled up inside that thing. And obviously, you got the added benefit, you can all put your bags in the back of it. It's quite good from that sense. But Jonny wasn't just tasked with meandering around Sri Lanka, dropping us off from city to city. Jonny had to do some crazy things in that Tuk Tuk that in any vehicle, car, motorbike, or otherwise, would have been a challenge. We entered with Raphael what is dubbed by locals and travellers alike Elephant Road.
Right.
Can you guess why, Adam? Have you got any concept as to why this road's been named after a pachyderm?
I've got a few ideas. Do there happen to be elephants in the surrounding area?
You'd be surprised to learn, Adam, there definitely is.
So there you are, ripping through in a red Tuk Tuk named after a Ninja Turtle and having to dodge huge elephants.
Famously, animals don't get enraged by the colour red at all. Famously, you're almost invisible to these great behemoths when you're zipping past in a bright red vehicle. But yeah, we had to do that. Johnny, how was that experience? It was crazy.
It was incredible. We survived. There was a couple of close calls. It's not just a 5-minute drive. It's 45-kilometre stretch of road between a northern town called Ella and the coastline of Sri Lanka, called the B35 is the actual road name.
Is it?
Yeah, B35/Elephant Road. And it's for this national park called Yala National Park, super famous for its leopards and also its elephants. I'd say the first half, just normal driving, bush-lined road, so you never really knew if an elephant was just going to step out at any time. So anytime there was no traffic, I was just driving straight down the middle of it to give me time to react if an elephant did come charging out. But you would see their elephant dung, you would see gaps in the foliage, where they would have come out in previous experiences. So I was constantly on edge, and I was telling these two in the back, Orla and Alan, look out either side. I can't look left and right. If an elephant charges out and starts chasing us, let me know so I can pick up the speed a little bit. The first time we saw one, there was just an elephant. It just came out of nowhere, just standing on the right hand side of the road, and it was just munching on some trees.
They managed to look quite a lot like other things from a distance, elephants. They're actually, despite being huge and grey in an otherwise green environment, you often think they're just a rock or a boulder until you get close and realise that boulder has a face, and that face is looking directly at you with what can only be described as intellect, and it's regarding you as sort of its enemy as you barrel towards it, and it's interrupting its meal. So it's quite ominous, isn't it?
And these elephants aren't friendly all the time. If you Google elephant attacks in Sri Lanka, you will see countless videos and stories and blog posts about elephants attacking tuk-tuks.
We met someone who's tuk-tuk got flipped.
Yeah. So I would recommend everyone doing that. Fortunately, that didn't happen to us. No tuk flippage in this case.
Yeah.
But that was in the back of my mind, and I did not tell these two that was a thing until after we survived Elephant Road, because I didn't want them being scared in the back.
Famously, I'm such a skittish character that I would have been all frenetic and anxious if I knew that the elephants were tuk-tuk flippers.
Yeah, that's so funny. So it's ill-advised against your better judgment. And was it because you needed to use that road to get where you were going, or did you kind of make a detour in order to have this experience with the elephants?
That is the main road to get to this Yala National Park, which was a bucket list for me. I really wanted to see leopards. You could obviously have detoured it by probably taking an extra 8 hours or something to loop around the entire island of Sri Lanka, but that is the route that Google takes you. It's whenever I talked to locals about it, they said, yes, go for it, just follow some advice. Like, if you see an elephant, stop 200 meters away, take your time, see if it moves. If it doesn't move, follow a local through in a bigger car, in a truck or a lorry. So we took that all on board, and yeah, fortunately.
I love how the elephants profile you. They're like, is this person a local? You got to wait for a local to go through because the elephants are just calmer around them. But yeah, there's elephant attacks all the time, man. It's crazy. And we did go to Yala National Park and we did see leopards. It was absolutely amazing, wasn't it?
We got very lucky. We saw a mating couple. They walked 5-6 meters to the left of our Jeep, just out of the blue. And then we had about 5 minutes uninterrupted time with the leopards, which was incredible.
I don't know if you know this, but Adam, up until this point, was known as Tripology's leopard spotter. He's had a famous encounter with the clouded leopard. It's a shame to be dethroned by two people on the podcast now who saw 2 leopards simultaneously and were with them for 5 minutes. So how do you feel about that, my friend?
I'm very happy for you. I can't be anything but very pleased that you were able to...
so sweet.
No, that's incredible. And I saw a clouded leopard, which I would say is about the size of a medium dog, whereas the leopard you saw, I imagine, is much larger.
The size of 2 mastiffs sellotaped together, yeah. So it's pretty cool to see. Yeah, it was amazing, man. And to be honest, things I maybe wouldn't have done or had the intuition to do or known about if I didn't just crowbar my way into Johnny's travel plans. So little bit of advice to the Tripology audience. If you meet someone who you like socially and they have a very stringent idea of what they want to do, why not ask them if you can come along? Would you, Johnny, say, and this is a leading question, that your travels in general have been enhanced by my presence?
The highs have been higher and the lows have been lower.
Yeah, okay, good.
I would, yes, overall, massively positive experience, I would say. You've added great value. Solo traveling, I'm sure you've talked about it before. I love solo traveling, but it's also great sometimes to split it up a little bit and have someone with you, especially a good friend like Alan.
Yeah, well, I mean, one would argue that if you weren't solo traveling in India and Sri Lanka, you wouldn't have had Alan join you.
Yeah, well, that's true. That is the nature of solo travel. Is we always kind of talk about this idea of solo travel, group travel. Solo travel often becomes group travel by the nature of you've set yourself up to be a person that other people can join. You can go on adventures. We were a 1, then we were a 2, then with Ola we were a 3. With that Tuk Tuk Raphael, we were a 4. Journeying on together. It's been a very Patreon content heavy week because me and Johnny also recorded what can only be described, I think, as the very first podcast from a Tuk Tuk. It's a video podcast, and that'll be on Patreon this week as well. So there is no better time but to join Tripology Podcast on Patreon. That's patreon.com/tripologypodcast. Hear the tale with Johnny, Ola and I. Hear me and Johnny talk about a Tuk Tuk from the back of a Tuk Tuk. I mean, why not? It'd be an incredible experience. To treat yourself to a little Patreon subscription.
That's amazing. I really look forward to hearing more. Johnny, thanks so much for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me on, both of you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Adam, anything you want to quickly leave the Tripology audience with? It's been another Adam light week here, so give them hell.
Got some interesting developments happening on my side. I've been in the UK for a week and a half. Initially, I thought I was going to be here for maybe about 3 weeks, but you know what it's like. You come back home and you're sort of things don't change as much as you would hope. And now that I'm this much closer to Europe, I can't sit still. So stay tuned. There's some cool things on the horizon, and I might even be flying to Spain or Portugal in a couple of days' time.
Oh my goodness, you beautiful traveller. Well, that just about concludes this week of Tripology. You're planning on leaving the UK once again, going travelling. Me and Johnny have been learning to surf. We're getting beat up on the regular by salty waves, trying to learn to balance, trying to learn how to just chill out and ride the Earth's movements. But as of yet, we've been largely unsuccessful. More on that perhaps next week. You can follow us on all social media at Tripology Podcast. Share the podcast with your friends and family. Share the podcast with your friends and family. We love to have you on board. Stay tuned for the Lost and Found section after the podcast. That's only available on Patreon. Yeah, man. Adam, I'm going to blast off to next week. Will you join me?
I will. I'll see you there. Heroes in a half shell.
Yeah, heroes in a half shell. Turtle power, baby. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.